I understand it. Now, it doesn't please me in the sense that things go too far. And this is the key point I'd like to make tonight, is just keep an eye out for when we go too far. And I've noticed that, you know, we've lost the ability to sort of have a little red flag that says we're going too far.
So let me ask you one more question, and then I'll open it up to the audience for questions. My question is this: what do you see as the role of rabbis in bridging the divide? Nobody thinks rabbis should take partisan positions. But political positions are not always partisan. There are political issues involving Israel, there's political issues involving Jewish denominations. Should rabbis stay out of this completely? Involve themselves when the issue is Israel or Judaism, or what are the guidelines that you would recommend?
That's a fantastic question. We've gone at this for a while now, and I have a personal viewpoint. It's very in line with Rabbi Wolpe's. When I go to synagogue, I don't want to hear a political speech. I want to be inspired. I want him to bring out the better angels of my nature, he or her. I'm looking for something different when I go to synagogue, especially on Shabbat. I see Shabbat as an attempt to elevate. I can do politics all week long. But it's interesting, though, that there's a midpoint. I'll give you just one example. I spent 4 months with a homeless woman, trying to help her, and somebody I bumped into on the street last year, and it just happened. Her name was Natalie Levine. I started filming her, so I got into the whole world of the homeless. And one day, I heard a rabbi speak about the homeless crisis in the synagogue, and it was powerful. It had nothing to do with the parsha of the week. It was the homeless, that we must care for the homeless. And it was going great until the rabbi picked a direction, political direction. There was some kind of a proposition or something, right? Now, that's where it can get divisive, because we all agree that we need compassion for the homeless. We must do something for the homeless. We must do more for the homeless. It's a Jewish value. We all agree on that. 100% of the audience agrees. Once you start promoting a certain solution, you might believe in it, but that's when things get a little divisive, because somebody might have a better idea, and then you can have a polite disagreement, and I could live with that. But it gets divisive when a rabbi takes a political position on a political solution. For example, it could be if you make a speech in shul as a rabbi and he's promoting very strongly some kind of a resolution, like the rabbis that were pushing the Iran resolution. I found that it didn't resonate with me because it was just too complex for a rabbi to take that position. It was too complex. There were so many non-rabbi issues involved with it, and I was studying the issues. So that stuff doesn't resonate with me. But when a rabbi motivates me to have compassion for the homeless, to have compassion to protect Mother Earth, to have compassion and to honor my parents and to be decent with my children and to just to bring out the best, I mean, that's, for me, a rabbi at its best.
Okay, we will entertain some questions from the audience. Let me give microphone to Michael Silverstein.
Okay. When I came to this country, the objective for new immigrants was to become Americanized and to sort of jump into the melting pot. In the meantime, Mayor Dinkins of New York described the American society not as a melting pot, but as a gorgeous mosaic. And I think that gorgeous mosaic has now also crumbled. Do you think that there is ever going to be a time when people living in this country, having come from elsewhere, start reading the local press, joining local organizations, and becoming somehow Americanized rather than parading with the national flags of the countries that they came from and escaped.
Well, it's interesting because it connects to what I was saying earlier, that there are identities that take priority. So I know a lot of people who are Democrats first and Americans second. You could be Jewish first and American second. You could be Hispanic first and American second. But the thing that scares me the most is Republican first, Democrat first, political first, and then America second. I miss those days. I've read many books on that, on all the diversity turning into American. That's where I come from. You know, this idea of being a proud American. I really am a proud American. How I vote is way, way down the line. I'm in love with this country. I would never offend the American flag. So, I'm a proud American. And it's sad that identities are superseding the American identity. Because America gives us all this freedom of speech, this freedom to demonstrate, the protection from the laws, and I think there's really a sense of absence of gratitude. That I guess maybe because I was born and raised in the third world, where if I ever wrote a column in Casablanca challenging the leader of my country, they'd show up at my door. Mr. Suissa, did you write this? Do you know how many columns I've written challenging the leader of my country here in America? Nobody's ever showed up at my door saying, Mr. Suissa, did you write this? Follow us. I don't take that for granted. When millions of people march on the streets and they don't get taken in, I don't take that for granted at all. So, look, I miss those days. I miss that whole idea of the melting pot, that something would bring us together, because I really feel the country right now does not have this core patriotism. Rick, maybe you can jump in on this one, because this is a very emotional subject for me, so I can start losing it.
This is a complex question that you asked, Peter. And let me offer just a thought with the career of Louis Brandeis, who in 1905 gave a speech in which he said that it was un-American, disloyal is the word he used, for there to be Italian Americans, German Americans, Irish Americans, Jewish Americans. His position in that speech was there's no place for hyphenated Americans in this country. 10 years later, he took exactly the opposite position after he became a Zionist. And his most famous saying was, I learned that to be a better American, we must be better Jews, and to be better Jews, we must be Zionists. And so it's a question on which there really are two sides, I think. And I myself am not sure which is the correct one. I'm sort of personally opposed to group rights as opposed to individual rights. But I'm also consistent with what I said earlier about the different forms of Zionism. I don't think there's one American way, and I'm not sure there's a melting pot that can sufficiently melt everybody. But I think you've raised a very fundamental question. I don't even know the answer to it. Michael?
My name is Marlene Kreidenberg, and I would like to ask Suissa, Mr. Suissa, you mentioned about the homeless, and today I was walking there in the street and I saw homeless. My heart was aching. What do you suggest can be done in Los Angeles to help these homeless?
The problem's getting worse. Great, because it's getting worse, and they're doing a lot more. We spoke to the mayor the other day, and putting a lot more money into it. I met with Xavier Slavsky, who spent 20 years of his life on this. I met with all kinds of people. It's very, very complicated, because so many of them have mental health issues, and if they don't take their medication, everything just, there's no hope. So it's complicated, and then the other complication is that whenever you succeed in that world, it attracts more homeless people because the word gets out. So I can tell you though that it's gone on the top of the radar right now for this city. It's a huge priority. We're starting a series, a homeless series, where we're going to Skid Row now and telling stories of homeless and they were growing up and their dreams and stuff like that. So we're going to do our share and tell stories.
My name is Ned Adud, and I'm always fascinated to learn about the relationship between Moses and Aaron. We know that Moses was Republican and Aaron was very liberal.
Moses and who?
Moses was Republican, all the way to the right, and Aaron was peaceful. How did these two prevent confrontation or go along and show some kind of closeness with each other and resolve the problems?
Well, the way Moses resolved problems, whether it was with Aaron or whether it was the Jewish people, was just to stay humble. He didn't act like he had all the answers. And he didn't want the job in the first place. So I miss Moses. I wish we had a few Moses in Washington, D.C. these days.
My name is Daniel Farzan. Jewish schools in Los Angeles cost anywhere between $30,000 and $60,000. How can we reasonably discuss intermarriage when we continue to charge this?
You're talking to someone with 5 kids, Jewish day schools. So close to my heart. You're saying because it's so unaffordable to give kids a Jewish education? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. Some rabbis take home $500,000. Rabbi Shalavet took home $350,000. In 2014, Rabbi at Milken takes home like $700,000. This is all public record. It's all open. I just think it's important if we continue to charge that to ask ourselves, where's the limit? How much can we actually blame integration for intermarriage? And how much are we to blame? Most schools only have 40 seats for each grade.
You know, I've spent a fortune with Jewish day schools. And maybe the most powerful thing I've ever done to fight intermarriage in my family and to give them a Jewish identity cost me no money. It's a sentence that I tell them Friday night when I do the Kiddush. And I've said this to them so often. I said, now kids, think that 1,000 years ago in a little village in Morocco, your bubbies and zaydis were doing the same thing. The drama of their story doesn't get taught in Jewish schools. It's called Goosebump Judaism. So for all the Jewish parents who cannot afford to send their kids to Jewish day schools, there's hope. The Judaism you can give your kids at home and connect them to the drama of their stories. Kids love drama. We are part of the most dramatic story in human history. And we always fail that. Goosebumps. We don't teach the goosebumps. So when I hear, of course there's going to be intermarriage because we can't afford to send our kids to Jewish day schools, that's too easy of a cop-out. It's too easy. When hopefully you're married, you're going to have kids soon. You have kids? You're not yet? Soon. Maybe next week. The most beautiful thing you can give them to keep their Jewish identity is what you can do for them on Friday night.
My name is Farshad Rafi. I think it's fine to talk about divides being part of ordinary life, but along with the political divide, there's also an economic divide. In 1980, the top 1% of earners in this country earned 8% of the national income. In 2010, the top 1% made 24% of the national income. And this percentage has, in all likelihood, grown significantly even since 2010. So what is the relevance of this widening economic divide in terms of the political divide that we are talking about? And are there any economic ways to, are there any particular ways to bridge the economic gap as well?
I'm not sure there's a Jewish way to address that particular issue, but I guess I would say the debate ought to be in how to create an economy with the maximum opportunity for most people. And if you do that, then hopefully incomes for everybody rise. And if you combine it with education, perhaps including Jewish education, you've prepared people to deal with a changing economic world. So, I mean, there are those who say there ought to be legislation to handle it. That's another point of view. Redistribution of income is a political point of view. From my standpoint, the question is a practical one. Does something like that work or not? And what's the best way to get a tide that lifts all boats?
Hi, thank you very much for taking time to talk to us. My name is Miriam Zilotolo. I came from Israel over 50 years ago. A country that I remember 50 years ago is so different than the country that I'm living in today. First of all, there's so much hatred. Whether you like the person in the Oval Office, have some respect for the presidency of the United States. Also, as far as free speech, there seems like a line you have to toe. If you don't toe the line, people call you every name in the book, and violence. I mean, I am afraid that we are going down in a very, very bad tunnel. And I want this country to be democratic. Whether you agree or disagree, you have the right to disagree without being threatened by violence. So, what do you think? I mean, I'm very alarmed.
Well, you're touching on a very important point. I call it the contamination of words. And this is a phenomenon that's really accelerated in recent years through just the way we use words, by texting and Twitter and the language that we see all over. And somehow we need to redeem words, because people just throw these words out there all the time, and some of those words are ad hominem attacks, and you're a racist, and these are like conversation stoppers. If I disagree, well, you're a racist, or you're a bigot,
Yeah.
whatever it is. And this is the contamination of words. It's not accurate. You can't deal with the substance, you can't deal with the ideas. It's part of the problem. So when Rick asked me, what can we do with the Jewish Journal, I'm hoping that we can help redeem words. And words need redeeming. And Jews, I mean, we should be at the forefront of redeeming words. Because it's not happening in the media. They're not redeeming words. Reasonable words don't get you big ratings. But reasonable words are what's needed now. Accurate, reasonable, fair, smart words. You know, if something upsets you, and how do you respond with the right words? I hear you. I disagree with that. I read something else. As opposed to, how dare you? You have no right to say that. You have no right to talk. And what do you know? And this is racist. I mean, I see that all the time.
Look at the universities.
Racist.
Universities.
Yeah. Right. I mean, in universities, don't get me started. Oh my God, don't get me started.
I'm Don Lowe's. I'm a little bit confused because I don't understand the definition that we're trying to work around relevant to the word divide. I don't know if we're talking about the Jewish divide or if we're talking about bigger divides. And I wonder if you would comment on that as it relates to some of the prior questions of 40 character responses and how we relate to a word that I haven't heard tonight, which is what is truth.
Well, you know, I think it's really telling that you chose the word political divide tonight, because politics has come to dominate our lives and our consciousness. So I think it's apropos that you use the word political, but we have many other divides. It just so happens that we live at a time when political divide is the one divide that counts the most. And I think that's a shame. So we should aim to go to a place where we can get into other divides. You know, have you noticed how much respect there is with religious plurality? And, you know, you get Reformed rabbis and Orthodox rabbis and conservative rabbis and Reconstructionist rabbis. You get them on a panel. There's so much mutual respect. And everybody's for religious pluralism, especially here in America, right? Hear it all the time. Religious pluralism is wonderful. But when it comes to political pluralism, it all goes by the wayside. I respect you that you have a different denomination, but God forbid you should have a different political view. So the word political divide, I mean, you know, I can't overstate how much we've allowed politics to define our lives.
Okay, we'll have the last two questions.
Excuse me, David. The one thing I haven't heard you address is truth.
Truth. Well, you know, I love that word, truth. There's my truth and there's your truth. And then there's his truth. We each own a piece of the truth. And together we own the whole truth. Who am I to say I own the whole truth? Who am I? That's why we need Moses to come back and remind us that none of us own the whole truth. I have Orthodox friends of mine who think they own the whole truth. And they don't. So the minute you think you own the whole truth, that's when the trouble starts. As you can tell, I didn't come here to hold back my words.
Last two questions, please.
Don, I just wonder whether you might accept an amendment and substitute for truth the word facts. Because what I have seen is there are a lot of opinions out there, but there's often very few facts to back them up. So that when you're discussing an issue, instead of focusing on what's the truth, try to set forth the facts that form your opinion. Connect those facts as if they were dots and then support an opinion that you say is correct. But rarely do I find that there's a truth in the sense that there's not an opposite opinion, perhaps based on alternative facts, but meaning other facts, not untruth. And that's why, just to thank you, Mark, just the way I wrote it. I thought that a good place to start any discussion about Jewish unity, or even national unity in general, is an essay that David Ben-Gurion wrote in 1954, 8 years after the state of Israel was declared. And in that essay, he wrote about all the difficulties that underlay the Israeli Declaration of Independence. And he said that in 1948, there were actually 2 miracles. The first one we all know about, the restoration of Jewish sovereignty and independence after 2 millennia. But there was another miracle, he said, one that perhaps was even more miraculous than the first. And that was the miracle of Jewish unity that allowed the state to be formed. So here's what he wrote, a sort of capsule history of Jewish disunity over more than 3,000 years. When Moses was merely delayed in descending from the mountain, the people gathered with Aaron as their head and made the golden calf. And after all the tribes had come to David in Hebron to appoint him as the leader of all Israel, the rebellion of Absalom broke out. And after Joab and Abishai suppressed the family rebellion and restored the kingship to David, a more severe rebellion spread, the rebellion of Sheba, which led, after the death of Solomon, to a split between Judea and Israel. Then only a few of the Jewish exiles in Babylon emigrated back with Ezra and Nehemiah to the land of Israel. And those who returned encountered opposition by the people of the land who had not been exiled. And in the days of the Second Temple, quarrels proliferated between the Sadducees and the Pharisees and between the Maccabean brothers themselves. And prior to the destruction of the temple, between the moderate and the zealot rebels. The rebels, too, fought among themselves no less than they fought the Romans. And according to Ben-Gurion, on the eve of the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, the Jewish community in the land was, he said, perhaps the most divided and fragmented of all the Jewish communities in the entire world. In no other land, he wrote, could one find such a conglomeration of different ethnic groups, cultures, organizations and parties, beliefs and opinions, shifting ideologies and international orientations, conflicting economic and social interests as in the Yeshuv. As a result of the ingathering of the exiles, the center of all the divisions and splits became Israel. But in 1948, Ben-Gurion went on, all those divisions were miraculously overcome, and representatives of every party signed the declaration. From the communists, who had forever fought against the Zionist enterprise, he said, as reactionary, bourgeois, chauvinistic, and counter-revolutionary, to Agadat Yisrael, which had perceived as apostasy any attempt to bring about the redemption of Israel before the coming of the Messiah. The representatives of Shomer Hatzer, who for over 20 years had maintained that a binational state was the only means to realize the Zionist goal, they participated in the signing. And the representative of the revisionists, who had vehemently fought against a state based on partition, they signed the declaration. And it was a very close vote in 1948 whether to declare independence. The vote of the committee of Ben-Gurion's party assigned to decide the issue voted 6-4, the narrowest possible vote to declare independence. And Ben-Gurion described how the last obstacle to the declaration was the final paragraph, where the ultra-radicals, as he described it, refused to have any reference to God, and the ultra-Orthodox refused to sign any agreement that did not have a reference to God. And what they came up with was a compromise. They decided to refer to trust in the rock of Israel, so that the Orthodox could believe it was a reference to the Lord, and those who took the opposite point of view could say it's just a metaphor for Jewish military strength. So both of them could read into that document what their own view was, and that was the final compromise that allowed there to be a Declaration of Independence in 1948. Now, fast forward 60 years to Israel Independence Day in 2007, and another essay by Danny Gordis, who I'm sure almost everybody here knows. He grew up in Los Angeles, and he moved to Israel in 1998. He wrote a column that day on Israel Independence Day, noting signs of flagging spirits in Israel, and he attributed them to the difficulties then facing the country, and said they seem to dwarf the problems of an earlier, more optimistic era. Israeli society, he said, is not characterized by a sense of we the people, the way the American society claimed to be in 1787. The divisions between secular and religious, hawks and doves, rich and poor, socialist and capitalist, Ashkenazim and Sephardim, Jews and Arabs are all wider and deeper than any might have expected they would become. We have come to realize that these divisions can't simply be papered over. The authors of the Declaration of Independence of Israel finessed that disagreement by using the phrase, the Rock of Israel, a phrase that the religious could interpret as God and others could take to mean the military might of the emergent state. Today, this is 2007, we know that no clever turn of phrase will bind us together. Now flash forward another 10 years to our present time, and the divisions seem, if anything, to have gotten worse, both in America and in Israel. In Israel, all those divisions that Gordis mentioned are still there, they still exist, and the controversy between Orthodox Jews in Israel and Reform and conservative Jews in America has been much in the news. In America, we have a 51-49 Senate. We have had a presidential election where the popular vote went one way and the electoral vote went another, and neither candidate got a majority of the votes. And for those who favor Jewish unity, at least unity on things relating to Israel, the latest national survey released by the Pew Center 2 weeks ago is sobering. Now, let me put up just one of the charts of the Pew report. This is their conclusion based on an interview of adults conducted in January. 1,500 adults were interviewed. And they say the partisan divide in Middle East sympathies is now wider than any point in the past 4 decades. And if you look over here at the Republican line, sympathy with Israel has increased to 79%, up from 49 in 1978. For Democrats, it's gone from 44 in 1978 down to 27. Now, this is not an argument either for the Republican Party or for Jews to become Republicans, because Israel has always thought that a strategic asset of Israel is bipartisan support in America. So this is a problem for Israel. It's a problem for AIPAC, whose entire organizational plan is based upon developing bipartisan support. And it's not an argument for Jews to become Republicans, because if anything, what Israel needs is for Jews to stay in the Democratic Party and try and increase this percentage. But it's not all bad news in terms of this study. If you look at the left-hand side, this is from 1978 to 2018. And this is overall what is your sympathy between Israel and the Palestinians. Who do you sympathize with more? Look at 1978, 45%. Look at 40 years later, 46%. It's the same. Same thing more or less with the favoring the Palestinians, 14% in 1978 and 16%. Both of these could be statistical blips. So somehow, despite the ups and downs in both parties, the support for Israel has stayed more or less the same over that period of time. So the Pew report is troubling, perhaps, but in another way, perhaps comforting. And the issue here, if you go down to when this started and when that started down in the direction, you see it's right about 2000, I don't know, 14 or 15, really, or really over here, 2016, which was the date of the conflict between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama on the Iran deal. And that is something that's going to get resolved one way or another, and we can hope that it gets resolved favorably one way or another, and we can return to percentages of similar support and bipartisan support in America for Israel. So, there are a lot of problems and divisions in both the United States and Israel these days, but the problems do not seem nearly as difficult as those that Ben-Gurion recalled in 1954, or that Israel itself encountered from the time of Moses forward. And in the United States, if you read in this weekend's Wall Street Journal the interview with Gordon Wood, who is one of the deans of American historians, then you know that he recalled that the divisions in America between Adams and Jefferson and Hamilton were much greater than the ones that we have now. So it may be useful to recall the old saying that at times like these, it's important to remember that there have always been times like these. Of course, it's easy to say that, but it's much harder to actually bridge the political divide. So for that, you need an expert. And that's why we're privileged to have David Suissa with us tonight. David needs no introduction to people at Sinai Temple. He's been an award-winning columnist. In the first few months, he's taken the Jewish Journal, which was already at a high height, to even greater heights. He's improved the layout, he's got new writers, he's got new faces, he's got more rabbis commenting on the weekly portion, he's got more diverse writers in the pages. There are more pages, 56, I think, last week. It's an extraordinary accomplishment, the Jewish Journal. And since he's well known to the entire community and certainly to Sinai, I'm just going to use the description of him that he wrote at his Twitter page, at Suissa's Tweets, for those of you who want to follow. He is president of the Jewish Journal, speaker, columnist, branding guy, given his advertising background, blogger, advocate, commentator, and dad. That's a very impressive list, and we're very fortunate to hear him give us his thoughts this evening. Mention one thing, when I started blogging, I always felt that there was no reason for anybody to read what I wrote. I had no expertise, I had no reputation. Why should anybody read what I wrote? And the only reason that I felt they should was that I found facts and I thought that I could connect some dots and then tell people something that they didn't know and they could check me on it because I was linking to where I got the information that led to my point of view. And so I share David's view that the idea that there's a single truth is a dangerous idea. But we can have a more fact-based discussion, I think, that would lead eventually to a closer approximation of it.
There's a fascinating study that just came out by the RAND Corporation, and it's called Truth Decay. And it said the diminishing importance of facts and analysis in today's America. And why do I say that? Because it's going to be on the cover of the Jewish Journal on Thursday. So I really draw your attention to that piece. And I'll be curious after you read it if you can give us your feedback.
Mr. Suissa, my name is Marshall Lerner.
He sends us a letter every week. I happen to like him.
Yeah, you even published a few of them too.
I have, because, and you know, above your name, the letter's editor, she always says, this guy writes every week. As if, how dare you, don't publish it. But I like some of them.
Yeah, thank you so much for your editorship of the Jewish Journal. With all due respects to your predecessor, it has gone way phenomenally.
Yes.
What you've done for the Jewish Journal. Thank you so much for what you've done for the Jewish Journal. You've reached out to the Jewish community so much, and we appreciate that. We saw at the beginning of this evening the numbers. There's hard numbers. The percentage of Republicans that are supportive of Israel is 79. Democrats is 27. The core constituency of support for Israel is American Jews, and the numbers also tell us that about 70% of American Jews are Democrats. What do you see as the support for Israel by the core constituency that is American Jews?
You have 3 hours?
Can you give me a few sound bites?
Look, I think sometimes, you know, you could criticize so often that you forget to love. And you say, tough love, tough love, tough love, tough love. And if you do it for 20 years, eventually you wake up one day and you just see tough. And you don't see the love. And I think the mistake we've made in the American Jewish community, and I'm part guilty, is we lost the love for Israel. Because love is not a sophisticated, intellectual, cool idea. Love feels like it's not a sophisticated idea. And for me, I find it's very sophisticated. So I think a fundamental problem is we haven't been able to love an imperfect country. And Israel is deeply imperfect, and we have trouble with the idea of love. We feel that love is not a practical idea. Because if I criticize, then I'm being really practical because I'm showing tough love and I'm going somewhere, we're going to fix problems. But you know what, at some point, you take a time out. You say, let's sort of remind ourselves how much we love our kids, how much we love our friends, how much I love my Judaism, how much I love my temple, how much I love, you know, maybe because I'm more of a romantic, you know, maybe it's the way I was raised, maybe it's the Judaism that I grew up with in Morocco. It was a Judaism of the sun, it was Judaism of the desert, Judaism of hope, it was a Judaism of joy. I didn't know the Holocaust existed until I met an Ashkenazi Jew when we moved to Montreal. So I wasn't raised with trauma, I was raised with joy. So I can talk about love in an easy way. I'm not embarrassed to talk about love. And I think this is part of what's missing. We've forgotten how to talk about love. I remember when David Wolpe called me, I think 20 years ago, and there was bombs falling all over Israel. He said, Suissa, I want to do a trip to Israel. He said, well, okay. He says, I'm so in love with this country, and they need us right now, and I'm getting a plane together. Let's go. I said, I'm in. Because it was love. He had love when he called me, and I had love when I called him back. It doesn't mean we think Israel doesn't make an enormous amount of mistakes. It doesn't mean, you know, we don't think Israel could be a lot better. It doesn't mean we don't have sympathy for the Palestinians. It just means we love. And we've forgotten how to love. So that's at the core of the problem.
Okay, this will be the last question.
Jerry Nagin, you know, as Jews, we identify, and historically we've identified with the downtrodden and the underprivileged, and that's a wonderful part of our tradition. What concerns me, I think, is that we have now developed into kind of a very narrow, focused specific politics of individual groups, and those interests somehow have overcome the greater interest in the success of the overall community.
Are you talking about Israel or America?
No, well, I'm talking about America now, yeah. I mean, things, look, Black Lives Matter, we can sympathize. The kids, the dreamers, we can sympathize. The homeless, we can sympathize. But what you've developed are these core politics where those interests seem to dominate everybody. And it creates the kind of thing that we're seeing in Congress now, where you can't get a budget passed.
You mean the interest of the minorities?
Yeah, a series of minorities, exactly. And we can be sympathetic to them, but how do we navigate that as a religious community?
I think one of my favorite lines of all time was this idea, the difference between rights and obligations. I think we've entered a time in America right now where rights have just gotten like, it's gotten over the top. We've taken a good thing, a wonderful thing, which is rights, but we've forgotten about obligations. And I think the Jewish way is really to put obligations ahead of rights, and I think the politicians have an obligation to teach us that. But to get elected, that's not the right message that gets you votes. You don't get votes by telling voters that they have obligations. You get votes by telling voters that you're going to give them a lot of free stuff. So it's a real cultural problem, a mindset problem. When are we going to have courageous politicians and leaders who are going to challenge us to take responsibility for our kids, our families, our lives, the world around us, that the state, the country is not going to come and make us happy and take care of us, that we have obligations. And if you smoke 4 packs of cigarettes a day for 40 years, I'm not going to take care of you and spend $10 million in healthcare costs. You have an obligation to take care of your health, and you have an obligation to take care of your parents. Which politician ever says that? It's rare. It's rare. So it's a mindset issue, and I go back to Judaism. You know, there are, as much as I love America, there are some major differences between Americanism and Judaism. You know, Americanism talks about the pursuit of happiness. Judaism focuses more on the pursuit of meaning. For Americanism really values the individual, whereas Judaism really values the community first, and so on. There are differences. And those differences, really, it's good news, because it means that we have an obligation to bring some of those Jewish values to America. And if we see that America is going in the wrong direction, we need to come back. And we don't come back just by pouring on compassion. We come back by pouring on a sense of obligation.
I want to thank David Suissa for a wonderful, insightful presentation. We love you too. You're an amazing man. And I also thank my good friend Rick Richman for helping us tonight on this presentation. Thank you very much, and good night. Thank you.
It's like being home. I can't tell you how often I've been in this room. My daughter started school at Sinai, so I'm really, really happy to be here, even though I'm completely exhausted, because today is press day when we go to the printer. So I want to push back politely to something Rick just said. He said, you know, we always have divisions. The divisions we have right now are really worse than before, unlike anything I have ever seen. My cherished partner and I, Rob Eshman, during the Iran crisis, we worked every day for 5 years, and we would see everything come and go. And we said, it can't get worse than this. The community was tearing each other apart over the Iran deal. And we really thought we had reached a nadir. And every week he would write for the deal, and I would write against the deal, and we still loved each other. to the point that JTA even wrote a story about us, and they said they have these two guys in LA that are both on opposite sides of the fence, and they're still friends. And that became a news story on JTA. I hated the deal, he was for the deal, and we had incredible respect for each other. Somehow we made it work. So a year later, the Trump hurricane shows up. And we look at each other and said, oh my God, we thought last year was the lowest of the lowest. And now it's even lower than the lowest. And that's been going on for a long time now. So I'm right in the middle of the hurricane. I see it from all sides. From the left, from the right, from the religious, from the non-religious, from the Democratic side, from the Republican side. And I have a big advantage over all of you, which is that that's all I do all day long. Most of you have real jobs. Whatever it is you do, you have real jobs. You could be a lawyer, a doctor, you can work in finance, in real estate, whatever it is you do. You do not spend your days analyzing the Jewish community and looking at the big picture and trying to see how this whole thing works and not work. So I come here humbly, not in a position of preaching at all, because I know that I have this enormous advantage of being able to spend all my days on this issue. And sometimes I wonder if I was a doctor. I think my mother still thinks I'm a doctor, by the way. What would I do? What would I think? How would I speak when I get home at night? If I'm spending all day long in a regular job and then I catch a little glimpse of Fox News or MSNBC or PragerU or Bill Maher, I might be full of anger. But I'm able to spend all my days, and I think it calms me down. So I can bring a certain perspective that might be useful to the conversation. Because when you see your children, I say children in a metaphorical way, when you see your Jewish brothers and sisters just going at it, I hear stories all the time of Shabbat tables being totally destroyed over a political conversation. I've heard so many stories. I told my daughter-in-law that I voted for Trump. She doesn't talk to me now. We don't talk. Thanksgiving meals broken up, relationships broken up, families broken up. So I get it. So I ask myself all the time, why does this happen? My good friend Yossi Klein Alevi, I wrote a cover story years ago in the Jewish Journal called "Can't We Argue Without Fighting?" And I called Yossi, and he said, you know, David, the Jews have this revelation gene. Ever since we all gathered at Sinai, 3,300 years ago, a few 100,000 of us, and saw the revelation from God, we think all our opinions are revelations. We think we're all coming down from the mountains with the tablets. Jews have a revelation gene. We own the truth. We also think that everything's life and death. So if Trump is president of the United States, that's life and death. If Obama negotiated a horrible deal that puts Israel in danger, that's life and death. I get it. So you combine those two things, a sense of life and death, and a sense of everything I say is a revelation, that's a lethal combination. But I try to pull back and look at the humanity of it, right? There's a study that says a lot of times when you scroll on your iPhone, you're looking for a shot of dopamine that gives you a high. There are certain things in media that give you high. I know, I have it too. There are certain writers, I just go after them because I know they're going to say something. It's going to give me a little high. So believe it or not, the news gives us highs. There are writers that give me highs. And I know when I'm feeling down, I can go to a certain few writers, and I can trust them. So don't underestimate the human component and psychological component of all of this. That we search for the media in a way that's going to feed us. And the other thing is, we internalize our ideologies. We become our ideologies. If something is life or death, I am now my ideology. I'm not your son, I'm not your father, I'm not your brother, I'm not your best friend. I'm a Democrat. I'm an Obama voter. I'm a liberal. I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative. I am my ideology. How dare you challenge the right to choice, the right to life? How dare you speak in favor of guns? How dare you, right? It's not that I disagree with you. Disagreeing with you would be wonderful. It's that I reject you. You have no right to feel that way. So this is the lethal mix that I see all the time. When I get letters, Jewish Journal, you should see the letters we get. These are not letters of disagreement. One of the reasons I love that Rick Richman is here tonight is because I've always loved his sense of dignity when he wrote. Like, he could be sharp disagreement with someone, but he never loses his sense of dignity. And we've lost our sense of dignity because we've internalized our ideology. I wrote a poem once called "I Am Not My Ideology." I am my mother's spicy omelet. I am my kids doing cartwheels when we go watch a movie. I am my son hitting a basketball at the buzzer. That's who I am. When Rich ended with the word dad after my name, that's really who I am. I'm a dad first. So I have a guy that comes to my Shabbat table, a couple, they're way to the left of me. And they're my best friends. They're my best friends. And I mean that. So we have sharp disagreements. In fact, I'm going to take it a step further. I'm actually closer to people I really disagree with. Believe it or not, I'm much closer to people that I have sharp ideological disagreements with. I'll tell you why. Because it really invests my emotion in the relationship. I introduced Rob Eshman the other night at a Americans for Peace Now dinner. And, people were saying, "Suissa, what are you doing here? Foreign territory." I said, "You kidding? I have so many friends here." And a few people were surprised. And I got up and I spoke about my journey with Rob. Rob was one of the founders of Peace Now in LA. And I spoke about our relationship and how we both listen to each other. And I said he really always made some really good points. Now, we disagreed, but he always made some really good points. But here's the other thing that Rob would do. He would always really listen. So if I had a whole other perspective on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I knew that he would listen. He wasn't listening, thinking, how am I going to respond to David? He was listening to really hear what I was saying. I learned listening from him. So there's hope at the end of the tunnel. If you are in situations where you see that your ideological differences are threatening your relationships, pull back. Pull back. Because I can tell you, as a journalist who lives all my days are with ideology and politics and issues and opinions. This is my whole life. I can tell you that it's only a small part of my life. In fact, it's only a small part of the Jewish Journal. My favorite sections of the Jewish Journal is Yamit's table. I adore her. It has nothing to do with politics. She lives in Uganda. She's the executive chef in the U.S. Embassy in Uganda. The way she writes about food, you say, oh, do I ever need a break from politics? You look at the poetry, food, books, Torah, so much stuff out there has nothing to do with ideology. I often think about politicians and I think about how happy they are. They're flying around first class and they're going to make a great salary until they die, because I guess that's the deal. Rick can tell you more in terms of how much they make and their pensions and their health care. They have pretty decent lives. And yet we give them the power to come and destroy our Shabbat tables. I refuse to give both politicians and politics the power to destroy my relationships. They don't deserve it. Now I can have stimulating conversations on Obamacare, on immigration policy, which, by the way, is so complicated. It's not that simple. I also care for the refugees in Israel, deeply. I've been with them in Tel Aviv. I know the social activists who are working for them. And I want to take better care of them. And I can tell you it's not that simple. Nothing is. The immigration debate that's going on right now in this country is very complicated. But when you listen to the coverage in the news, where's the complication? I have the TV on all day long in my office. It's black and white. You know why it's black and white? Because it's more profitable that way for media companies. It's a lot more lucrative for a media company to dig in and give you something polarized than to give you a complex message. So if I flip from Fox to MSNBC all day long, I keep flipping. And you can just feel they're giving me Doritos. It's ideological Doritos. Whether it's from the right or the left. But we're Jews. We got to go beyond those lucrative polarities. We have an obligation to go beyond. You're blessed with the rabbi of all rabbis that knows how to go beyond. Okay, I know he's on sabbatical now. But his essence is here. And if there's one human being in LA that understands complexity, it's Rabbi Wolpe. So we have an obligation to go beyond and deeper than MSNBC and Fox. We're Jews. You know, someone sent me an op-ed recently, and it was so one-sided. And I called the person, I said, you know, this is really, really, really one-sided. He said, well, that's my style. I take no prisoners. I said, well, can you take a few prisoners? Just a few? He said, what do you mean? I said, you know, Judaism is about complexity. We're supposed to look at the depth of an issue to make readers think, so that they don't think it's just about bludgeoning you so that you can see how right I am, because it feels so good to be right. So you're going to take 1% of my readers and they're going to love you, and the other half's just going to get all angry. So is there a way to capture the complexity? Because capturing the complexity used to be the Jewish way. It still is. We just don't do it enough. So I'm here tonight to say that if we want to bridge the political divide, there are two things we must do. The first thing is, let's keep in mind that we are not our ideologies. And the second thing is to try to capture the complexity. So on that note, we can have a conversation.
Okay, let me politely push back on your polite pushing back on my statement about divisions within the Jewish community. And I guess what I want to challenge you on is whether the divide is a bad thing. Because when you look at the history of Zionism, there's two things I think that stand out. One is that it was never one thing. There was labor Zionism, socialist Zionism, general Zionism, organic Zionism, cultural Zionism, which opposed a state but wanted a cultural center in Palestine, religious Zionism. There were at least 7 forms of Zionism. And the reason, or one of the principal reasons that Zionism succeeded, in my view, is because each of these forms of Zionisms had to argue for their opinion and their side. They had to argue for followers, for funds, and the argument itself made each form of Zionism better, and it made it a bigger tent. So I know our title is Bridging the Divide, but I would like to make a case for the divide, and that the important thing is not to bridge it, but to respect it. I had lunch today with Kurt Byron, who's studying the Talmud 1 page a day over this 7-year period. And I asked him what he thought about bridging the divide, and he said the key is to adopt a Talmudic approach, which he described as stating the opposite view and your opponent or adversary's point of view in the most respectful fashion and in the strongest terms, which requires you not to take the easy argument out, to confront the best argument, and make your own arguments sharper. And so my question for you is, how do you see the Jewish Journal functioning there? Are you trying to lower the temperature or change the temperature, or what's your editorial approach to the divide that we're trying to bridge?
Well, you push back to my pushback,
yeah.
So I'm going to push back to your pushback to my pushback. It's funny because I have such respect for Rick. I wish we could go back to the days of Ahad Ha'am, the days where all the Zionist voices would be challenging each other. I wish we would go back to those days, because those days were before Twitter. And I long for those days when we can have rigorous intellectual debates, where the divide has a sense of nobility to it, where it's arguments for the sake of heaven, and where great ideas clash. But the reason I'm pushing back is because I'm missing that. That I think in the age of social media, when our attention spans have shrunk, I'm not seeing a nobility of debate. I'm not seeing any intellect in the debate. I don't see clash of great ideas. I see a lot of emotion. I see a lot of resentment. I see a lot of taking things personally, you know, and this is perhaps the thing that disappoints me the most. So the answer in terms of the Jewish Journal is I absolutely am trying to bring more intellect and complexity to the debate. And the point I made earlier is one example of that, which is instead of having pieces that, look, there are 2 ways to go about it. When you want to sort of show the clash of ideas. One way is to actually show the clash of ideas. We do that. We've had pro-con pages on any number of controversial issues, right? But the other way, which we're also trying to do, is looking for writers who have the inner struggle inside of them. The writers who have the complexity, who struggle. I bring up Yossi Klein Halevi again, and he says that in Israel, so many Israelis today, they have the right and the left inside of them. They have a right side of them and a left side of them. He says the staying in the West Bank is an existential threat to Israel. Leaving the West Bank is an existential threat to Israel. This is the epitome of complexity. Holding opposite thoughts at the same time. So instead of saying, all right, you're there, my friend on the left, you hold all your opposite thoughts, and I hold my thoughts, and then we see how we can negotiate this divide. I like to see if there's something that person's got that I should embrace, that I'm missing. Because that person was not raised the way I was raised. You know, if the Lubavitcher Rebbe was raised as a Buddhist, he'd be a Buddhist. If Rob Eshman was raised like David Suissa from Morocco and Montreal, he'd be a Sephardic hothead, just like I am. If I was raised by liberal hippies, I'd be one of them. So when you look at somebody and how dare you think this way, you've got to remember, they're them and you're you. They've had a whole life of influences that you have not had. So the idea of expecting you to think like me, not just, it's insulting, not to mention unrealistic. And I think this is the narcissism of our time today, is we get offended when people think differently. So the answer to the Jewish Journal, I mean, I hope you sort of see it. By the way, I saw too many leftover Jewish journals. Not a good way to make me happy. Okay, so please take a few extra copies. But I hope you see that we have tried to bring more complexity to the conversation, not to mention beauty and sensuality and human interest and storytelling. We started a series on Israel that has nothing to do with politics or a startup nation. It's just called Humans of Israel. It's storytelling, whether you're on the left or the right. So it's a complicated question, Rick, this idea of sort of bridging a divide, because there are things that divide us, but there are so many things that don't divide us. So as the head of a paper, it's like navigating all the things that divide us, the things that don't divide us, the thing that I must show you that you're not seeing. It's a complicated message, but at the end of the day, anything that starts tearing each other apart, that starts tearing us apart, is a red line. And we've lost the ability to have red lines. A red line is raising your voice, the sense of resentment, taking things personally, attacking, ad hominem attacks. All these red lines have been blurred. It's like it seems that, look, I have my sister. She's my best friend in the world. I adore her. She's the most decent, sweet, reasonable human being on the planet that I know. When I bring up the name Trump, she freaks out. She turns into another human being. And I love her. And I get her. I get it. But it's amazing. I've seen this happen. I've seen what happens to people when certain issues get brought up. And I get it.